We're in the middle of a climate crisis. We have so many things that skilled people could be doing that are about building a better world and not about killing other people and perpetuating war. DSEI is Defence and Security Equipment International. It's one of the world's largest arms fairs. It takes place at the Excel Centre in East London, and it's been running for 24 years.
Some of the new powers that are in the Public Order Act have not actually been introduced yet, but it's possible that by the time that the protests start, that they may be.
DSEI is a marketplace in death and destruction. At this year's DSEI, there will be representatives from governments such as Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Bahrain, Qatar. People have tried their best to shut it down before it even happens. So there's people who have blockaded tanks that are being taken into the arms fair and other military equipment. And there's been a real sort of effort to do everything we can do to actually stop this arms fair taking place, because it is really a matter of life and death for people.
And there's two particular things that we're concerned about. One is a new power to stop and search people if they have items on them that may be used for disruption. Partly because there's an awful lot of things that people may be taking down to a protest, like D-locks and camping gear and all sorts of things that can be used, that can be justified as somehow being items that could be used for disruption. But mainly because it's not as though the police have ever needed a justification for stopping and searching people anyway. I think the likelihood is that if those powers are introduced, anybody that's seen as a peace activist, or certainly on the days when there are particular days of action over the course of DSEI, so I'm thinking in particular the Palestine Day, and if there's a number of people from the usual kind of bugbears for the Metropolitan Police, like the environmental campaigners, that they will be all over them, stopping and searching people. And the other thing is because stop and search powers are just used so regularly, police officers using them every day. So it's not something that officers are going to be a bit kind of nervous about using.
Now, that power hasn't actually started yet, and it's down to the Home Secretary whenever she wants to bring it in, so it could come in at any moment. So there's a chance, for example, if the protests are really disruptive and the government feels like the police need more powers to deal with it, that it could be brought in with a day's notice.
And then the other thing is the surveillance that might be used in order to use the powers for serious disruption prevention orders. If that's introduced, there's going to be a rapid increase in seeking to gather evidence on people. And DSEI's always been a process which is focused on direct action, right? It is absolutely about stopping the vehicles from getting onto the site.
There's been people who've abseiled off bridges, who've done amazing sort of lock-ons and blocked the road and blocked the vehicles. I
mean, certainly the expectation is that imposing those orders isn't going to be as simple as the stop and search powers. It's going to need quite a lot of convincing for the courts, because we still have a Human Rights Act, because the rights to freedom of assembly still apply. And so building a case that is actually enforceable is going to need an awful lot of surveillance, intelligence information, not just on the targets for those orders, but all the other people that they're in contact with, all the kind of the networks that they're part of, the people that they know. If it does come in by the time that DSEI starts, then it is potentially going to be one of the first tests of those powers.
We had this judgment called the Ziegler verdict that said that protest was a legitimate use of the highway, and that people were justified in taking action, and it was specifically around protests that took place at DSEI. But that's since been watered down, so it's actually getting a lot harder to bring those kind of defences. However, I think with DSEI, because this event is sort of taking place right at the Excel Centre, and because we know how abhorrent the arms trade is, there's a very, very strong argument about why people feel that it's necessary to take the action that they do at the arms fair. And we've had a lot of successes in the courts, so people have argued that they were preventing a greater crime from taking place. And In several cases, the courts have ruled that there was credible evidence that illegal arms sales were taking place inside the Excel Centre. So, for example, in 2016, torture equipment was found at DSEI. The situation in Yemen has been described as one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters by the UN, and British bombs have been used to commit war crimes. There's been attacks on schools, on hospitals, on funerals, and it is just appalling the way the British government has continued to support the Saudi regime in what they're doing. Thankfully, there is now at least a temporary and hopefully permanent ceasefire with Yemen, but that doesn't change the internal human rights abuses within Saudi either, and the fact that we should be taking a stand against these regimes rather than arming them. There's 2 weeks of protests happening from the 4th of September. The first week is targeting the setup of the Arms Fair, so that's when we see all the big bits of equipment arriving at the Excel Centre. And then there's a week of action from the 12th of September while the Arms Fair itself is taking place. There'll be a camp during the first week, so there'll be food, there'll be an information point at the east entrance to the Excel Centre. So come along and get involved and see what you can do to help shut down this Arms Fair.
The 2 pieces of legislation that have been introduced have created the situation where the police have got a far greater latitude to make decisions about what is or isn't disruption. And they can use all the other regular powers that already existed, from obstruction of the highway to imposing restrictions on demonstrations, all of which become easier because the definition of serious disruption has been made easier for them to use. So we're going to have people down there all day. Green and Black Cross will be down doing the legal observing throughout the course of DSEI, and we will be asking all the people that are coming down to protest from the different movements to show up throughout the course of the week to make sure that they tell us, what's happening, what are the new powers that are being used, and in particular, what are the justifications being used for them, so that we can try and get a sense of what's coming next.